may not be the whole 1.3 million, but at least some 0.5 million diesel operated pumps should be replaced by the solar operated irrigation system. But there are some problem is also there, because those solar irrigation systems are used only around say 100 days in a year. So rest of the time, that the power that generate from those systems have no use. Now we are developing a policy so that, since grid are approaching everywhere, so that those solar irrigation system can feed their generation, redundant generation, unused generation, to the grid. Already we started from the SREDA, we started a piloting, so that to identify that whether there is any technical viability of those things, and that is going to be happen very soon. Solar boat is another innovative interventions that SREDA is trying to promote. In Bangladesh, there are around 1.5 million diesel operated boats are there. Most of those boats are normally carry the passengers as well as the lightweight goods are carried by those diesel operated boats. SREDA did a pilot to see the potentials and the technical parts of the solar boating, and we found that this is technically possible. Now SREDA is working to make it commercially viable. So we found that the integration of solar panel to the roof of the boat might not be good enough to take care of the whole energy need of the boat. In that case, we are trying to develop a policy that there will be a land-based solar power plant from where those boats can be charged and then they can play. There is also another innovative intervention we are trying to promote, that is the solar ice flake system development mostly in the riverine areas, where the fishermen catches the fish and they need the ice to preserve their fishes, to at least to move to the nearest growth center, which might be a couple of hours distance from their catching field. So there we are trying to produce, and electricity is not there, so there we are trying to produce that. Those are the small islands are there. There we are trying to produce the ice flake to support those fishermen so that they can go that. So we did one pilot project with a non-government organization, NGOs, who are supporting these to the local fishermen. Next slide, please. Other off-grid interventions are wind energy. There are 2.9 megawatt capacities of 3 wind projects are there, mostly in the islands, to take care of the energy need of those islands. We are trying to scale it up, especially for the islands. There are hundreds of islands are there where it will not be possible to extend the grid because of their isolation from the mainland and very distance from the mainland. So there we are trying to take care of their energy need through the solar, wind, diesel hybriding system. There is a biogas is also a potential option for renewable energy. SREDA recently developed a commercial biogas policy through which we are trying to scale up the biogas plants interventions, not only for household cooking but also for electricity generation, or using the biogas as a compressed biogas to use as a transportation fuel. There are some mini grids are also we are trying, especially in the hill tracts areas. where the localities which are very remote areas where grid extension is not possible, and the community is a small communities are there. They don't need a huge power also. So there we are piloting from the shredder, piloting the mini hydros. Solar safe water supply system, these are also for the off-grid areas. There are especially in the coastal areas where there is a huge crisis of drinking water. Most of the water are saline water, uh, and there is a cyclone, um, frequent cyclones are there. People mostly before they drink the pond water, the rainwater they reserve in the ponds, but because of the cyclone and uh, there are sometimes those are uh, contaminated by the saline water. So we develop a couple of hundreds of solar operated uh, drinking water supply system by which we draw the water, underground water, uh, and then supply it through the pipe to the communities. Then solar street light is also a good interventions in mostly in the rural areas. Please move to the next slide. Other RE's interventions are biofuel, gas well, geothermal, tidal energy, wave energy, but these are very innovative energies. We do not have any remarkable work yet, but our policy cover all those areas also. Next slide, please. Yeah, if we see that legal and regulatory frameworks and administrative frameworks to promote the renewable energy, we found that we have the renewable energy policy. We have a dedicated agency called Sustainable and Renewable Energy Development Authority, who will take care to promote the renewable energy as well as the energy efficiencies. In the ministry as well as in every utilities have a sustainable energy unit, separate unit headed by a director, and in the power ministry it is headed by an additional secretary to take care of the renewable energy promotion and energy efficiency improvement activities. We have a dedicated training institute set up very recently called BPMI, Bangladesh Power Management Institute, who actually develop the trained manpower. We also sometimes outsource the manpower for those renewable energy intervention. There are also we have a standard business model that we develop not in the for on-grid and off-grid renewable energy promotional activities. Next slide, please. There are some associated interventions also for the financing, the micro level, meso level, macro level, meso level, and micro level. There are we have a central bank has a dedicated green financing framework by which we through the commercial banks trying to facilitate the concessional financing for promotion of the renewable energy. We have the regular data collection and dialogue facilities are there, capacity development activities are also there, and SRADA is trying to develop some flagship project to um, uh, to attract the private investment in this renewable energy sector. Next slide, please. If we see that the present scenario that the most of the renewable energy is generating from the solar, because solar is the most potential source of technology so far in Bangladesh. So that's why the solar is the prominent part. Then followed by the hydro, but hydro potential is very limited in Bangladesh because Bangladesh is a flat country. Only we have the Chittagong Hill Tracts area where we develop a 230 megawatt of a hydro projects. Others, that wind is 2.9 megawatt, biogas is around, biogas and biomass is altogether maybe around 2 megawatt. So these are the very limited scale. So we are mostly focusing on the solar and wind. Next slide, please. The for investment from the private sector, we have a very convenient business policy, business model. Utilities are very free to sign the power purchase agreement of private companies, and that power purchase agreement is for at least for 20 years. Some cases it is up to 25 years. And there is a implementation agreement which assures the guaranteed payment. Guaranteed payment through the 12 months standby LC guarantee and backed by the sovereign guarantee. So there is no case for last 40 years. There is not a single case of non-payment from the government side to the private project developers. You know that in the that I showed in my slide that there is a 22,000 plus megawatt of generation capacity in Bangladesh, of which almost 50% in the private sector, in the conventional energy side, and for in the renewable energy side, it is almost 80% in the private sector, and there is not a single case of non-payment yet. Next slide, please. For the licensing aspects, that for up to 250, from 250 kilowatt to 500 megawatt, there is no need to take any license for renewable energy project from the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission. Only you have to take a waiver certificate. You have to inform and have to take a waiver certificate for the license. Project which are more than 5 megawatt capacity, they need to take a license. And project up to 2050 kilowatt, that means most of those are in the off-grid areas, they don't need to take even waiver certificate. They only have to inform the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission. And for utilities, to ensure the payment from the utilities for the renewable energy offtake, the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission, when they go to set up the electricity tariff, bulk tariff or the consumer tariff, they take care of the price of the renewable energy. At the beginning, the renewable energy, it is because at the beginning the renewable energy price was the significantly higher than the conventional energy. And also, but for renewable energy, there is no capacity charge, but there is a priority dispatch system is there for renewable energy. Whatever the energy generated from the renewable energy projects, that have the first right to supply to the grid. Next slide, please. There are key stakeholders in the financial sectors are I said that commercial banks are there. It is state-owned commercial banks, private sector commercial banks, microfinancing institutions, and non-banking financial institutions like Infrastructure Development Company Limited. They are the major partner, major player in the financing sector. There is the which is allowed by the central bank as well as the microcredit regulatory authority. Next slide, please. Yeah, next click please. But there are huge challenges are also there. One is the for renewable energy project, there is a high upfront cost. This is one of the, especially for the rooftop solar that I said, that rooftop solar, there is a huge upfront cost is there. And sometimes, since these technology are not very much known to the industry owners for rooftop solars, the industry owners sometimes very spectacles to invest the money for the renewable energy technology. Next. Cost-effective storage and of intermittent renewable energy sources. Sometimes you know that solar that generate in the daytime, but the most of the power is consumed. Our peak hour is the evening time. So in the evening time there is no generation. So we need some kind of solution so that we can store the energy generated from the solar and we can utilize in the peak hour. That means in there. So cost-effective storage is also necessary for there, as well as when there will be a huge amount of this intermittent energy, solar and wind, that they are going to be integrated into the grid. They are also for to ensure the grid quality, we might need a certain amount of storage. Next
Uh,
one.
hello, sir. Anandan here. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. As we are running short of time, we would request you to move.
I am going
Yeah,
fast. Going fast.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Sorry. Yeah.
Then higher organizational and operational cost, that is also at present it is there. Next. Lack of trained manpower, that is also a issue. In most of the cases for large project, we have to bring the expatriates, which has cost more for the projects. Next, please. Yeah, shortage of land for solar PV project. This is one of the major challenges for Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a huge population. We have not that much of land mass. So this is and that's why we are looking for the rooftop solar as well as the floating solar. Next, please. Backup service is also, there is a shortage of challenge is also there. Next. Procurement and inventory is another challenge. Next. And grid integration of intermittent energy that I already mentioned. Next, please. So that, but there are, we are trying to overcome those. One, I mentioned that solar home system. Now we are trying to develop a model we call the peer-to-peer interconnected microgrid. That means that though where there is a huge amount of solar home system nearby, we are trying to interconnect them, and where grid already approached. So grid approach, but there is a outage are also there, load shedding are also there. So we are trying to interconnect those solar home systems so that a solar home system have the generation as well as the storage, so they can store into their battery, and when there is an outage they can utilize that storage among themselves. If nobody, someone do not have the demand, he can sell it to the his nearest neighbor through this interconnection system. This is one of the, and he can be paid off. And this is one of the system that we developed already, and we there are 7, 5, 6, 7 this kind of peer-to-peer interconnection microgrids are there. Now we are trying to develop a policy so that if there is a also there is more energy storage, then they can feed into the grid also. Next one, please. This is a net metering system that I think, I hope that everybody you know this. Next slide, please. To make it acceptable to the rooftop owners, we are following the 3 different business model. One is the capex model, another is the opex model, that somebody come through the ESCO model, somebody will come and put the system in the roof, and they sell the electricity to the industry owner. And to make it more acceptable to the rooftop owners, we are also trying to develop a model to go through competitive tariff bidding system for OPEX model, that we are bundling the few rooftops and then go for tariff bidding, say 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, or 5 megawatt capacity of the say 50 or 100 roofs, and go for tariff bidding. And then through competitive bidding, we select the system installer and the project developer, and they will set up this system and either sell the electricity or they will go for capex model. whatever may be that. Yes. Next one. These are the boards that we develop under the pilot phase. There are different models we develop to make it stable and also to make it acceptable. Now we are working on this solar board to make it commercially viable. These are technologies perfect now, but to make it commercially viable. Next, please. The total our potentials is 2,177 megawatt by 2021, but this is a huge challenge. But Bangladesh is very aggressive to develop the renewable energy and I already mentioned there are a couple of hundreds of almost more around 1,700 megawatt worth of the project as PPA has signed or the LOI has been issued, and we are trying to moving very fast, as well as for the wind also we are trying to moving very fast to achieve this target. Next, please. Thank you very much. Thank you for hearing me. Yeah, Anand, back to Anand.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your insights and for sharing the experiences from Bangladesh. May I now invite Esomi and Ella Sexton from PwC to present on economic analysis and business models and the prioritization tool for solar irrigation from prioritization tool. Yeah, over to you, Esomi.
Great, thank you very much. So I will be speaking a bit to the first few phases of this work, and then my colleague Ella will speak about the work that we did in the last phase. So PwC has been working on the International Climate Initiative's Mobilizing Investment for NDC implementation program, which is funded by the German government since 2017. The program is focused on 7 countries, including Bangladesh. I'd just like to start by providing a bit of the context around why Bangladesh was chosen as a focus country for this program. As I'm sure all of those who are listening are aware, Bangladesh is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change due to its low elevation, the high population density Sadiq referred to, and the economic reliance on agriculture. And despite its relatively small contribution to climate change, the country has committed to reducing its emissions by 15% by 2030, conditional on the availability of climate finance, and to work towards a low carbon economy. There are a number of opportunities to achieve these commitments through the scaling up of renewable energy. It's both a cost-effective and pragmatic solution to reducing emissions and to, crucially, increasing energy access in off-grid areas. It's worth noting that Bangladesh has a target to increase the renewable share of the energy mix to 10% by this year and to 15% by 2030. If we move on to the next slide, this contains an overview of the approach we took to this project in Bangladesh. As I mentioned, the work was spread over 3 phases. The first of these involved doing analysis of different sectors in Bangladesh to prioritise those with the greatest opportunities for mobilising investment for NDC implementation. The sectors that emerged from the scoping studies were power, industry and transport. And our analysis led us to decide to focus on the off-grid solar energy subsector for the subsequent phases. In the second phase, we developed business models and investment cases for 3 off-grid solar technologies, which were solar mini-grids, solar irrigation pumps, and solar boats. We also analysed the policy and regulatory environment for those technologies and identified barriers to investment in these technologies and developed policy recommendations to improve the environment for mobilising investment. Our final phase, which my colleague Ella will talk to in a couple of minutes, was focused on the development of a geospatial mapping tool to identify priority sites across Bangladesh for the rollout of solar irrigation pumps. If we move on to the next slide, this is just an overview of the outputs we delivered as part of the second phase of work. We analysed the barriers to market development and development business models for all three of the technologies mentioned. However, we didn't develop an investment case and more detailed policy recommendations for solar boats due to it being a much more nascent technology than mini grids and solar irrigation pumps. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll just summarise our learnings from the first two phases. These were that mini grids and solar irrigation pumps that had been developed to date had been mostly financed through public development and concessional finance. And while there has been private sector involvement through the project developers, there have been very limited cases in which private investors have financed projects. And the reasons for this include a lack of awareness of the investment opportunity, concerns regarding government plans for grid expansion, low tariff structures offered by IDCOL, the Infrastructure Development Bank, and also the seasonality of irrigation demands. So IDCOL has ambitious plans to finance the rollout of 50,000 solar irrigation pumps in the next 7 years, which means an increasing need to attract commercial finance. And one of the key policy recommendations that we made to improve the environment for investment into solar irrigation pumps was to determine the economic viability of connecting pumps to sell power to the grid and to consider alternative sources of revenue generation. Therefore, we decided to work with Schrader on a third phase to develop a dynamic decision-making geospatial modelling tool to prioritise areas to roll out solar irrigation pumps and to connect them to the main grid. I think we can probably skip the next slide in the interest of timekeeping and go to the next one, which is tool methodology overview, and I'll hand over to my colleague Ella to speak to the tool that we developed in the third phase of work.
Thanks, Yaz. So this tool was developed in collaboration with Weve Economics. So they created this economic model, which you can see a diagram of on the screen now. And the objective of the model was to identify which parts of the country would be best suited to the siting of solar irrigation pumps under various conditions. And then we took the outputs of this model that they created and visualized that in a tool that Schrader is now using to prioritize where to roll out solar irrigation pumps. So we can go to the next slide. So one of the main activities during the development of the tool was gathering all the necessary data from various institutions in Bangladesh, as well as international best practice evidence, and we combined both of those into the economic model. And then we can go to the next slide. So there are several assumptions that underpin the model. So one of which I'll just touch on a couple of the key ones. One of which is that obviously flood risk is a key consideration in Bangladesh, and this model was developed with the assumption that the Bangladeshi government already has their own mature flood risk monitoring systems, and so the tool would be used in conjunction with those as opposed to having that factored in. And then there are other aspects such as groundwater stress, economies of scale on the pumps, exclusion factors for arsenic, salinity and slope, which were included in the tool but not in our main attractiveness score, as you'll see on the next page, and a few others. You can go to the next slide. So this is the main interface of the tool. So as you can see, there's quite a lot going on, but I'll just point out a few key things. So in the center, you have the main map, which shows the relative attractiveness of Bangladesh for solar irrigation pumps to be sited on each 2x2 kilometer grid cell of the country. And as you can see from the key, the darker orange shows more attractive areas and the lighter gray shows less attractive areas. And there are a few things that you can do on this page of the tool to change the conditions under which you're looking at the attractiveness of the country. And we included these because it was identified to us by Schrader that certain factors might change, and certain different policies might be introduced that would affect the attractiveness. So vivid economics modelled under those various different conditions. So the key one on this page is the SIP attractiveness rating box on the left-hand side. And as you can see, there are 3 different options there. So the model results can be displayed under the assumption that the pumps will be used for irrigation only, or under the assumption that surplus power from the pumps will be sold back to the grid, or under the assumption that it will be sold also back to local households. And if you just flip between this slide and the next slide, you should be able to see the difference that that makes to the attractiveness. Thank you. So on this slide, we can see that there's a lot more orange in the country. And so with sale of surplus power back to the grid, SIPs become a lot more attractive across Bangladesh as a whole, and also a lot more concentrated in this central northern region. And so that is one of the functions of the tool, is to sort of demonstrate to Schrader what the impact of different policies, such as allowing for surplus power to be sold back to the grid, would have on the ability of SIPs to be scaled up as they are planned to be. And then if you go on to the next slide, so to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this one is now showing the bottom left-hand switch, which is one of the future condition switches. So this is the second sort of future-proofing aspect that we built in, which shows what would happen to the attractiveness of the country if these 4 key conditions were varied. And the one that it's demonstrating here is the price of irrigation. So if you flip, thank you, to the next slide, then it shows you that under a higher irrigation price, the country becomes a lot more attractive. In the interest of time, we can probably skip this slide. This is just showing a different visualization of the data. And then finally, the key findings of this phase of work were that solar irrigation does have massive technical potential in Bangladesh, and the most attractive regions are in the north and northwest. And finally, what I touched on before, that the sale of surplus power to the grid could make a really important contribution to the commercial viability of SIPs. And this phase of work also addresses, to an extent, all of the 4 investment barriers that were identified earlier on. If you go to the next slide. Just to briefly touch on this, the next steps. So there are a couple of different things that could be done. So a pricing study for SIP tariffs, design of potential SIP financing instruments. We've also shared this work to great reception at the COP in Madrid last December. And we've also kept this methodology really flexible so that it could be replicated in different contexts. And we're currently exploring opportunities with other PwC network firms to use this in other areas. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Yasomi and Ella, for the very useful presentation and the detailed one as well. So may I now invite Mark Jacobson to present on RE Data Explorer tool. And Jack, we also request you to keep the presentation short considering the interest of time. Thank you. Mark, you can. Mark, you have to unmute yourself. We see that you have muted. Okay. Mark?
Yeah, so, yeah,
Sure.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. Please go on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the Bangladesh EC-LEDS team for giving me the opportunity to speak. And this project that I'm going to talk about today was a very exciting one that's ongoing now, but we do have results in a specific tool that we'd like to promote. And with that, I'll move on. Let's jump to slide 5 to get to speed up the presentation here since we're short on time. Yes. So that's how about slide back up just one. I guess my slide 5 and yours is a little bit different. Yes, thank you. So the main issue that we're trying to address here within Bangladesh, and we addressed certainly in the United States and other countries throughout the world, is trying to mitigate risk. So when you're trying to promote a new industry, you really want to bring in outside financing, project financing, to get these projects moving forward. And in order to do that, you need to identify the different risk buckets and then attack each one separately. So the most important, I would argue, one of the first and most important, although they are all important, risk buckets is understanding what the wind resource is, quantifying it, identifying where it is within the country, and then promoting that data set around the world so that individuals can easily access it, look at it, and use it for their project prospecting and pricing. So this tool that we developed was focused on understanding or accomplishing those goals, understanding what the risk was, and being able to manipulate the data. So moving to the next slide, please. Next slide, I covered that one, I think. So I just want to touch a little bit on how we validated the data that was uploaded into the tool before I start talking about the tool. I think that's important to provide confidence in that data set. So previously, and when I say previously, I'm talking about 20 years ago and even 10 years ago, you were looking at usually just models of wind data, and frequently those models were created from data sets that didn't quite match what the wind resource was at the height of a typical utility scale turbine hub. And that's one of the key goals of this project, was to make sure that we were taking a model but verifying it through actual observed data that was at hub height, that 80 meters for Met towers that we use for observation, and also with a SODAR unit that you see on the picture right now that actually sends a sonar up into the sky and measures wind speed and other meteorological data at 200 meters. So we're actually able to get data from low levels, medium levels, and all the way up to 200 meters. Next slide. Next slide, please. I'll skip past that to the next slide. Next slide. There we go. Thank you. Oop, back up one. So thank you, that's perfect. So when we were verifying the data, verifying the model with actual observed data, we inserted, or installed, I should say, 9 different measuring sites across the across the country, and you can see those individual sites represented by a anemometer icon. You can see that we got good representation across the entire country, and it was with those actual observed locations that we're able to validate the entire data set, so that you're able to look at any area within the country of Bangladesh and download data, observe the data, and actually download that data. Jump 2 slides to the Indiana slide. Renewable, yeah, one more. Thank you, perfect. And why are we doing this? I think this is one of the slides I like to point at the most. When you're promoting what your wind resource is to industry, you look at the slide on the, the map on the left. These are all wind resource maps, but they show what the wind resource might look like in a real example when the hub height is not matched by the wind resource map. So the left side represents an old map at 50 meters that was generated by a model, and you can see that it didn't really show for the US for this particular market. Wind speeds certainly have to match a particular market. It just showed some areas in the 6.5 to 7 meter per second range, and there wasn't much development in Indiana. In fact, I'd say zero development on the in the scenario where there was that wind map on the left side. Then there was a project that looked at capturing wind speeds at 90 meters and improved the modeling techniques that were used. And you see that wind map on the right side totally changed the wind resource picture, and all of a sudden 1,500 megawatts were used. Again, I would not focus on what the wind speeds were because those are specific to a particular market. Next slide. Perfect. So this is what started the notion that we needed a better tool. We didn't need a PDF map. We needed an actual data tool that allowed us to capture data, manipulate the data, layer one data set over another, and really help the different stakeholders that are involved in developing renewable energy projects. Next slide. So this is what the tool looks like.
Hello, Mark. Sorry to interrupt. 3 more minutes, please. Sorry.
All right,
yeah.
Next slide. So this is what the next slide, please. So this is what the Renewable Energy Data Explorer looks like. And why was it created? Again, I mentioned to take different data sets and overlay them on top of each other and get a better visualization of what the data looks like, what the wind resource looks like, and assist decision makers as they're prospecting for wind, maybe siting a transmission line, or looking at various renewable energy policy. Next slide. This is just an example of overlaying a transmission layer over the top of the wind resource layer, and quickly just looking at where does a strong wind resource overlap with transmission. This is the first step of any energy developer and or a transmission planner or a policymaker. I think they're going to want to look at that basic overlap of data. Next slide. This is just an example of another data layer. You can see up on the upper left-hand side of the menu. Before we were on the data layer tab. Now we're on the legend tab. We're able to click on a different data layer. This one was looking at different provinces and land use, and actually see how that changes and how that overlaps with the available transmission. Next slide. This is an example of the query tool. So if we move over again, I would direct your eyes at the menu on the left. We've now moved to the query or the analysis tool. And it's kind of hard to see with this slide, but there's the capability with this tool to hit a download button. First, we query a particular area. In the very center of the map, you can kind of see a pink square. You're able to actually highlight that area. Then where the arrow button is pointed, that button is identifying a download tool. You hit download and you can actually get the data to your particular computer and manipulate that data however you like. Next slide. This is backing over to the legend tool and shows you how you can manipulate and put one layer on top of the other. You can actually change the transparency. You can move one layer on top of another or below another. And this just shows you how you can manipulate the data. Next slide. So just a couple of quick overviews on why we developed the tool. It helps with visualization of the data, gives you better access to the data, and I think it really reduces prospecting time. Next slide. So probably don't have time to go through this in much detail here as we're trying to wrap up, but I was giving these slides will be available for those that are participating on this webinar, and this gives you an example of how a developer, and I used to be a developer, would use the tool and apply it in a more detailed way. So it gives you kind of a step-by-step example of the three different legs of development. So let's move to jump to slide 25, where it says what we've learned. So actually, with such little time left, so I already talked about that. Go to the next slide, please. Next slide. You can see that we can download all the data from the tool and create a very nice and detailed wind speed map that shows what the wind speed looks like at 120 meters and 160 meters. And for those of you that are not keeping track of wind technology, 120 meters is about the average wind turbine hub height right now, and it's moving to 160 meters. We might be hosting a 160 meter turbine on our site here in the next few years at the National Renewable Energy Lab. 28, slide 28, thank you. And this shows, again, when you download the data, how you can put it into buckets and see how many square kilometers there are at a particular wind speed bucket. I'll jump past the next slide to slide 30, and I'll wrap up. Thank you. And this gives everyone on the webinar a quick look at where you can access the tool, how you can download small buckets of data from the first the tool itself. You can actually go on the NREL website and download Globus Connect, and you can download the entire data set. And that's again, one of the reasons why typically this tool is being used is because data sets for wind energy are in the tens of terabytes, and you just don't want to store that on your computer laptop anymore. It's too big of a data set, and that's why again, a tool like this is very helpful, because you're able to actually look at a site online through the web and download specific areas that you might be interested in. So this particular slide just shows you where you can access the tool, where you can access Globus Connect, which is a different tool that just allows you to download large amounts of data onto your office server, if that is a goal of yours. But you don't have to do that. You could just use the tool itself to download specific areas if you're looking at individual sites. We did have a report that we finished up, and that's now published. And I'd welcome any questions. So I'll turn it back over to our panelist organizers. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mark, for the informative presentation. And we are really sorry to cut you short in the interest of time. Sorry about that. Ritu, you can go to the next slide. So participants can raise hands. So we will unmute you. You can ask questions, and when you if you have, you can also send your questions by typing in. So far we have received a couple of questions. I'll just read it out. The first question is to Mr. Siddiq. So how far is Bangladesh from commercializing solar boat for domestic travel? So I would also like to check if is the solar boats completely running on solar power, or we have alternate power also, or in future are we also going to plan set up electric charging station in the vicinity of lakes or wherever? So do we have such plans? So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Solar board, in true sense, it is not yet commercially operating in Bangladesh. We are in the process of developing the solar board which can play on commercial basis. Number one. Number two is now it is playing in partial commercial board, like in a tourist center. That is in a park. There is a lake where people come and go by boat in the lake. They move. So there we are, the solar board that we constructed under the piloting program. There we are playing this. For that purpose, it is okay, but to apply on commercial basis, it is not yet developed. We are working on it, and another one is that since it is not possible to run fully on solar, if the solar panels are put in the top of the board, that's why we are also planning to set up the charging station at the shore of the river, from where the boat can be charged, so that they can play fully on renewable energy, by the renewable energy on commercial basis.
Sure. Thank you, sir. And the next question is to Mark. So Mark, are there any examples you can share of how the RE Data Explorer has been really used in decision making by policymakers? Is there any example that you can show?
Yes. So some countries, they like to look at RE Data Explorer in developed energy zones. And so decisions that are made, the way they visualize or use the visualization capability of the tool is to look at a province that might have a strong wind resource combined with transmission that runs through that strong wind resource and has available land. And then they'll make incentives that will be focused in that particular area. They'll create a renewable energy zone and then incentivize developers to actually develop in that zone, whether it's tax benefits that they would get, or maybe a little bit higher energy price, a tariff incentive, but usually it's tax benefits. And that's an example of where they've used the RE Data Explorer for policymaking, renewable energy zones.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mark. I have one more question to Esomi. So Esomi or Ella, one of you could answer. So this geospatial mapping tool, can it be used for all solar projects, or is it specific to SIPs only? And the other related question, can it be used by other countries, other Asian countries, if we have to recommend? How easy or difficult is to adopt it? Is it free of cost, and what knowledge is needed to use this tool?
On the first question, the tool that we created is just for solar irrigation pumps, but the methodology could be applied to other technologies.
Yeah, and we've developed this tool through, it's actually hosted on a platform, but we conducted a lot of different economic modeling that fed into the data that's hosted on the tool. It is specific to Bangladesh, and you would have to gather data if you were to do it from from a different country, but the majority of the data we did use was publicly available, or it was sourced through working with different political partners and researchers. So the tool could definitely be made for different country contexts, but it would require probably the same level of effort to gather that data, to do the economic modeling, and then to build the tool.
Okay. So in one of the slides, it's given the attractiveness is 0 for SIPs in some areas. So what could be the reason for absolutely 0 attractiveness? Is it the groundwater that is the reason, or something else?
So yeah, that could. So one of the reasons could be that the groundwater is inaccessible, or it could be that the soil is really saline or polluted with arsenic. It could be that there aren't really many communities in that area that would use a soil irrigation pump. And the index is 0 to 10, so there will be some sort of element of nuance in that 0 to 1 score. But as the aim of the tool is to rapidly scale up the market, the aim is to identify the sort of top-down most attractive sites.
It's also worth noting it's done on a 2 by 2 kilometre grid square basis. So within those 2 by 2 kilometres, there'll be areas that are urbanised and not under agricultural cultivation that just will have a score of 0.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So it is scheduled to end by 6:45 Indian time. It is 6:48. Sorry about the delay. We will take few more minutes to take a couple of questions. So one question has come to Mark. So many RE investors ask for minimum 1 year on-site WRA to get more confidence on the revenue stream. Is there any fund available for further WRA in Bangladesh? So, yeah. Mark,
could you repeat the question? Yes. Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I heard correctly.
Yes. Many RE investors ask for 1 year on-site WRA. I don't know what's that abbreviation. So
I know that. Wind resource assessment.
Okay, all right. To get more confidence on the revenue stream, is there any fund available for further WRA in Bangladesh?
So that funding question is probably not best directed at me, since we're an entity that uses the funds. We don't provide the funds, but I think that each year, as we work with USAID funds or World Bank funds, we're continuing to try to add to the data set that is already there. But it's important to note that the goal of this project was not to provide at every square kilometer, a data set that included observed data, that had an actual MET tower or SODAR unit actually measuring data. That was not the goal. The goal was to provide a very high level of confidence data set that would allow for better prospecting and better transmission siting, better policy making. It is correct that when you actually want to move forward and develop a project as a developer or an investor, usually you want to have actually more than 1 year. I would say 2 years of a wind resource assessment, WRA, where you have actual data. But that's step 2. We were providing step 1 because we didn't even know where the wind speeds were the strongest in the first place. So when you are developing, it does make sense after you've used the tool to look at where your top wind resource sites are relative to transmission, relative to land availability, and then install your own MET tower and get another 1 to 2 years, or excuse me, I'd say 2 years worth of data. 1 year is not enough usually of observed data, and then you take that to the bank and get your project financed.
Anand, may I supplement on these issues?
Yes, go ahead, Sadiq.
Yeah.
This could be the final question.
Yeah, and because of that, what Mark said, that Bangladesh going to set up the 3 different locations, the wind project at 3 different locations where the aerial metmast was there. So it is the site-specific data is there already because an aerial metmast was there. In addition of that, on the basis of the aerial data, extrapolated data, Shredder is going to install 5 more wind metmast at 5 different locations where the extrapolated data showed that there is a potential, so that those data can be utilized by the project developers. So that process is going on and hope to be implemented by the Shredder. Metmast setting activities will be start very soon. Thank you.
Sure. Siddiq sir, one question to you. So this is regarding net metering. Is there any targets that we have set for net metering for the upcoming years? And usually what is the time taken for approval for the net metering systems? And as part of the policy measures, has the approval process been simplified? Can you share some insights on this?
Okay, thank you very much. You see that for net metering, Bangladesh government has a target, or SREDA has a target to develop at least 400 megawatt within next 3 years of installed capacity of solar rooftop through this net metering policy, under the net metering policy. Now that how much time it required and how to make the process simplified, to make the utility people aware about this, Shredder already conducted the training session for them to make them acquainted with the net metering system and to facilitate the process of, or expedite the process of permission to have the net metering system for more than 500 uh, officials of different utilities, and that process is still going on. I hope that in the meantime, already 38 megawatt of capacity, in the meantime, within 1 year, 38 megawatt of capacity of contract has already been signed for net metering system. So if any specific issue anywhere for delaying the process of approval, I think if they will bring it into the notice of the Shredder, Shredder is in a position to take care of that. But our process is very simple and it is time bound. That if someone apply for net metering to the utilities, within the 10 days, they have to give the permission, first-hand permission, and then they will go and visit, and within a month the permission should be granted, the final permission for installation of the system.
Okay.
So this is a very time specific, time bound system is there.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much, sir, for the detailed explanation. So I think we will end this session now. So thank you all for attending the webinar. I also take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for sharing the insightful presentations and experiences. We hope the participants have found it very useful. We will share the presentation and the recording later. We recommend you to share these lessons widely in your circle and with the peer members. If you have any further questions, please feel free to write to us. Our email ID is given. You could also reach out to any of the speakers if you have any related questions. Thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Asia Lead Partnership, my fellow panelists, as well as all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.